Dear students, welcome to the e-program as suggested by AK2. Today we will discuss urban design as part of the 8th semester architectural design. The aim of this lecture is to give an overview of Kevin Lynch's elements of the urban environment as set out in his book The Image of the City in 1960. Kevin Lynch pioneered a scientific approach to the urban design, studying and analyzed the components of urban design parameters and human evaluation. He put forth the image of the city as the concept which can be perceived, evaluated, and changed. Lynch's most famous work, The Image of the City, has significant and robust influence in the fields of urban planning and environmental psychology. He is known for his work on the perceptual form of urban environment and was an early supporter of mental mapping. The image of a city is the result of a 5-year study on how observers take in information of the city. What does the city's form actually mean to the people who live there? What can the city planner do to make the city's image more vivid and memorable to the city dweller? To answer these questions, Mr. Lim, supported by the studies of Los Angeles, Boston, and Jersey, using these three cities, Lynch has understood how the users understand their surroundings in consistent and predictable ways, forming mental maps. Lynch also coined the words imageability and wayfinding. City formulates a new criterion, imageability, and shows its potential value as a guide for the building and rebuilding of cities. To understand Lynch's theory on wayfinding, to become completely lost is perhaps a rather rare experience for most people in the modern city. We are supported by the presence of others and with special wayfinding devices, maps, streets, numbers, route signs, bus placards. In the process of wayfinding, the strategic link is the environmental image, the generalized mental picture of the exterior physical world that is held by an individual. So the image is the product of both immediate sensation and of the memory of the past experience, and it is used to interpret information and to guide action. Thus, to need to recognize and pattern our surrounding is so crucial and has such long roots in the past that this image has wide practical and emotional importance to the individual. Every citizen has long associations with some part of his city, and his image is soaked in memories and meanings. Every instant there is more than the eye can see, more than the ear can hear, a setting of view waiting to be explored. Nothing is experienced by itself, but always in relation to its surroundings. The sequences of events leading up to it, the memory of the past experiences. So Lynch pioneered the technique of having people draw mental maps and analyzing them to understand how people perceive their surroundings. The characteristics of the environmental elements, whether they are natural or man-made, determine the visual quality of the built environment. These characteristics are what Lynch named as imageability. So, imageability is that quality in a physical object which gives it a higher probability of evoking a strong image in any given observer. It is that shape, color, or arrangement which facilitates the making of vividly identified, powerfully structured, highly useful mental images of the environment. It might also be called legibility or perhaps visibility in a heightened sense where objects are not only able to be seen but presented sharply and intensely to the senses. Legibility is the term that has been used for a long time in urban planning, defined as the ease with which its parts can be recognized and organized into coherent pattern. This definition states that degree of legibility depends upon the formation of cognitive map within wayfinder's mind. Legibility is the degree of distinctiveness that enables the viewer to understand or categorize the contents of a scene. The greater the legibility, the greater the preferences. Hence, Lynch considered legibility as a physical and spatial characteristic of the environment, so visual sensations of color, motion, smell, touch, and sound, etc., are all cues of orientation that reinforce legibility. So, if we can put it like this, just as this printed page, if it is legible, can be visually grasped as a related pattern of recognizable symbols. So a legible city would be one whose districts or landmarks or pathways are easily identified and are easily grouped into an all-over pattern. City image is important because the ability to recognize objects in our environment is crucial to our ability to act and function in places effectively. Thus, ability of a city is somewhat depends on its ability to be easily found and identified. A highly imageable environment would have a good form, a strong identity, and would be recognizable to the common dweller. A high imageable, apparent, legible, or visible city in this peculiar sense would seem well formed, distinct, and remarkable. This city of Venice might be an example of such a highly imageable environment. So, how the image is built? The environmental images are the result of a two-way process between the observer and his environment. The environment suggests distinctions and relations, and the observer, with great adaptability and in the light of his own purposes, selects, organizes, and endows with meaning what he sees. So the image of a given reality may be significantly between different observers. So this is how the mental images formed, the environment and the observer. These are the two factors which result into the environmental image. Thus, environmental image may be analyzed into three components: identity, structure, and meaning. What is identity? A workable image requires first the identification of an object, which implies its distinction from other things, its recognition as a separable entity. This is called identity, not in the sense of equality with something else, but with the meaning of individually or oneness. The second, structure. What is the structure? The image must include the spatial or pattern relation of the object to the observer and other objects. And finally, the meaning. This object must have some meaning for the observer, whether practical or emotional. Meaning is also a relation, but quiet, different from one, special or pattern. So I hope you understood the meaning of environmental, or how the environmental image is formed. It is basically combination of the identity, structure and the meaning. Identity, that is the first identification of the object. Structure, meaning the spatial or the pattern relationship between the object of the observer, and its meaning, which is again very important to show the relationship. Now we see what is a mental map. People first create a mental map that constitutes a mental representation of what the city contains. This mental representation, along with the actual city, contains many unique elements, which are called the Lynchian elements. Lynch came to his conclusions about the basic elements of the city form that shape perception largely by observing recurring patterns in the maps. A highly imageable environment would have a good form, a strong identity, and would be recognizable to the common dweller. This Lynch argues that people perceive cities as consisting of underlying city form elements such as paths along which the people and good flows, edges which differentiate one part of the urban fabric from another, landmarks which stand out and help orient people, district perceived as physically or culturally distinct even if their boundaries are fuzzy, and nodes where activities and often paths meet. This Lynch believes that humans have an innate desire to understand their surroundings and do this best if a clear city image is discernible from these elements. Thus, create and identify at each location different from all others. So, indeed, these elements may be of more general application since they seem to be reappearing in many types of environmental image. So, let us now see how these elements are defined. Paths. Paths are the channels along which the observer customarily, occasionally, or potentially moves. They may be streets, walkways, transit lines, canals, railroads. For many people, these are the predominant elements in their image, although their importance varied according to the degree of familiarity with the city. People observe the city while moving through it, and along these paths, the other environmental images are arranged and related. So, when you move in the paths or through the roads of your city, some kind of image is formed in your mind right from the childhood. Those images are intact in your mind, maybe. The paths are the predominant city elements. Concentration of use or activity along a street may give it prominence in the mind of the observers. You see, this is Washington Street. This Washington Street is the outstanding Boston example. The users consistently associate it with the shopping street. You can see the street, this building, and the cars. So, these also marked by a torrent of pedestrians. You can also see the people moving or the pedestrians moving. This is another example of Broadway in Los Angeles, and it was recognized by its crowds and its streetcars. If you can see in this image, there are so many streetcars or so many cars which are moving on the street, and of course, there are crowds along these roads. So Broadway was perhaps the only path which was unmistakable for all as the original main street and still the largest shopping concentration in the downtown areas. It is marked by the crowds on its sidewalks, by the length and continuity its shopping, by the marks of its movie houses, and by the street cars, where other streets carry only passes. Although considered to be the core, if anything is yet, Broadway was not a shopping area for most of these middle class people. Its walks are crowded with the ethnic minorities and lower income groups whose living quarters ring the central section. So you understood how these pathways are the predominant elements in the city. Path identity, also to the special facade. Special facade characteristics were also important for path identity. Beacon Street in Commonwealth and the Commonwealth Avenue were distinct partly because of the building facades that line them. Details of planting seem also to be relatively unimportant, but a great deal of planting like that on the Commonwealth Avenue could reinforce an image of the path that is very effective. So you can see in this image the amount of plants or the trees that have been planted, and it creates a vista. Paths are also important features. Particular paths may become important features in a number of ways. Customary travel will of course be one of the strongest influences. So that major access lines such as Boston Street, Sorrow Drive or Tremont Street in Boston, Hudson Boulevard in Jersey City, or the freeways in Los Angeles are all key image features. This is an image of Hollywood Freeway with obstacles to traffic, which often complicate the structure, may in other cases clarify it by concentrating cross flow into fewer channels, thus became conceptually dominant feature. This Hollywood freeway was very dominant in the minds of the people over there. Paths also have continuity. The paths, when identifiable, have continuity as well in an obvious functional necessity. People regularly depend upon the quality and the functional requirement is that the actual track or bed of the pavement go through the continuity of other characteristics is less important. So you can see these pavements, they are also very important feature in the road network. These are being used by the pedestrians, and the pedestrians have some kind of image in the mind of these roads when they are walking along them. So this is a street in Jersey City. Paths which simply have a satisfactory degree of track continuity were selected as the dependable ones in the environment like Jersey. Paths also have direction. Paths may not only be identifiable and continuous but have directional quality as well. One direction along the line can easily be distinguished from the reverse. This can be done by a gradient, a regular change in some quality which is cumulative in one direction. Like this is a thematic unit of Beacon Hill, which gives you the direction. Some kind of directional identity is formed. Most frequently sensed were the topographic gradients in Boston, particularly in the Game District, and the Beacon Hill, the Beacon Street. Paths also have scaling. Once a path has directional quality, it may have further attribute of being scaled. One may be able to sense one's position along the local total length to grasp the distance traversed or yet to go. Features which facilitate scaling, of course, usually confer a sense of direction as well, except for the simple technique of counting blocks, which is directionless but can be used to compute distance. Meaning by is this, suppose you are on a path and actually where you are standing on the path, you can scale out through the different elements present on the road. Like you see this Christ Church in Shimla, which is actually a landmark on this particular path. So if you're on this path somewhere, you can scale out or you can understand how far you need maybe to reach your destiny. So this particular path or this particular element on the path not only gives it a direction but also helps to understand the position of the user, or it helps in scaling. Hence, the paths were the predominant city elements, although their importance varied according to the degree of the familiarity with the city. Most often, perhaps, scaling was accomplished by a sequence of known landmarks or nodes along the path. As you see in this picture, this particular landmark is very much known to the people of this particular place. Even a new person coming to the city can understand or is able to scale himself where he is with the help of these landmark buildings. The next element, edges. Edges are the linear elements not used or considered as path by the observer. They are the boundaries between two phases, linear bricks in continuity, shores, railroads, cuts, edges of development walls. They are lateral references rather than coordinate axes. Such edges may be barriers more or less penetrable, which close one region off from another, or they may be seams, lines along which two regions are related and joined together. As you can see in this picture, in these images, they may be seam lines or they may be lateral references, they may be the barriers, right? Like this sea or this river becomes a barrier for this particular city. So this forms the edge for the city. Or even this particular road network is seen and it along the two regions gets joined. So these edge elements, although probably not as dominant as paths, for many people are important organizing features. Edges are the linear elements. The Charles River in Boston is the best example of an edge and has all the qualities of an edge. This Charles River, once a swampy backwater, is now well defined and developed. Everyone remembered the wide open space, the curving line, the bordering highways, the boats, the esplanade, the shell, the water edge. On the other side, the harbour front was generally known and remembered for its special activities. Edges may also, like paths, have directional qualities. The Charles River has the obvious side from side differentiation of water and city. This is the water and the city at the back. And the end from end distinction provided by the Beacon Hill. Edges are the visible edge. The lakefront of Chicago is a magnificent example of visible edge, gigantic in scale, that exposes an entire metropolis to view. Great buildings, parks, and tiny private beaches all come down to the water edges, which throughout all its length is accessible and visible. Edges are the uniting seams. While continuity and visibility are crucial, strong edges are not necessarily impenetrable. Many edges are uniting seams rather than isolating barriers, and it is interesting to see the differences in the effect. This is the Boston Central Artery and seems to divide absolutely to isolate. So the edges are often paths as well. Where this was so, and where the ordinary observer was not shut off from moving on the path, he is on the central artery, for example, then the circulation image seemed to be dominant one. The image or the element was usually pictured as a path, reinforced by the boundary characteristics. So you see, these lanes or the Boston Central Artery is an edge which is actually a uniting seam. It is not a barrier. Edges divides and unites. This is an image of Charles Street. The Charles Street at the foot of Beacon Hill both divides and unites, leaving the lower area in certain relation to the hill above. So you see this particular path is dividing as well as it is uniting. Charles Street carries heavy traffic but also contains the local service stores and special activities associated with the hill. It pulls residents together by attracting them to itself. It acts ambiguously either as a linear node, edge, or path for various people at various times. So you see, this Charles Street could be a path, it could be an edge, and also it could be a linear node. So now we have come to the third element, that is the districts. Districts are the medium to large sections of the city conceived as having two-dimensional extent which the observer mentally enters inside of and which are recognizable as having some common identifying character. As you can see this particular image, this is a low-rise settlement. So this could be one district, whereas this district, which is a completely high-rise thing, this complete again forms a different district. So always identifiable from the inside, they are also used for exterior references if visible from the outside. Most people structure their city to some extent in this way with individual differences as to whether parts or districts are dominant elements. Districts are sections of the city, usually relatively substantial in size, which have identifying character in them. So you see this particular image again where you have certain elements in common, and this is of a substantial size, and these common elements form some kind of character in them. Districts are the sections of the city. Let's see how they are. Districts have various kinds of boundaries. Some are hard, definite, or precise. Other boundaries may be soft or uncertain, such as the limit between downtown shopping and the office district. To those existence and approximate location, most people would testify. So you see this image where the variable boundaries of Boston districts are visible. With the different land uses, you have the different districts. The Boston district illustrates these differences of boundary character by outlining both the maximum extent assigned to any district and the hardcore of common agreement. Districts are thematic continuities. The physical characteristics that determine districts are the thematic continuity, which may consist of an endless variety of components like the texture, space, form, detail, symbol, building type, use, activity, inhabitants' degree of maintenance, topography. In a closely built city as Boston, homogeneities of facade, material modeling, ornament, colors, skylines, especially fenestrations, were all the basic clues in identifying the major street. The Beacon Hill image for example, included steep, narrow streets, old brick row houses of intimate scale, the inset highly maintained wide doorways, black trimmed cobblestone, and brick walls, quiet and upper class pedestrians. So you see, the resulting thematic unit was distinct by contrast of the rest of the city and could be recognizable immediately in other parts of the Boston. There were some thematic confusion. You see this image of Bunker Hill in Los Angeles. It's an interesting example of a district of fairly strong character and historical association on a very sharp topographical feature, lying even closer to the city's heart than does Beacon Hill. Yet the city flows around this element, buries its topographic edge in office building, breaks off its park connections effectively and causes it to fade or even disappear from the city image. The typical feature were imaged and recognized in a characteristic cluster, the thematic unit. Districts are functional also. You see, this is an image of the Civic Center in Los Angeles. At the far end of the Broadway is the Civic Center, a recognizable district. The Civic Center is the strongest because of its obvious function, the size, spatial openness, new buildings, and definite edges. If you can see this road, the Broadway makes a definite edge and these buildings. They give an identity and create a definite edge. However, few fail to remark it. Next comes the nodes. Nodes are points, the strategic spots in a city into which an observer can enter and which are intensive foci to and from which he is traveling. They may be primarily junctions, places of a break in transportation, a crossing, or a convergence of path, moments of shift from one structure to another. So as you see these images, these are certain kinds of nodes as they are forming some kind of junction or some kind of convergence of the path. Or the nodes may be simply concentrations which gain either importance from being the condensation of some use or physical character as a street corner hangout or an enclosed square. Nodes form the context. Conceptually, nodes are small points in the city image. They may in reality be large squares or somehow extended linear shapes or even entire central districts when the city is being considered at a large enough level. So indeed, when conceiving the environment at a national international level, then the whole city itself may become a node. So you understood the context of the nodes. If it is a small point or a single unit like the squares, they may be node for the city. However, the whole city could be a node at the national or the international level. So the context changes the node or the importance of the nodes change with respect to the context. Nodes may be both junctions and the concentrations. Nodes may be both junction and concentration, as in the Jersey City's Journal Square. This is an image of the Journal Square city in Jersey, which is an important bus stand and automobiles transfer, and is also a concentration of shopping. The nodes can be important even when the physical form is shapeless. So as you see this junction, there is no as such structure which is giving or which is having its making its importance. However, this is some kind of junction of the roads. The Journal Square is strong because of its intensive shopping and entertainment activity, but its traffic and spatial chaos are confusing and unsettling. Note the thematic concentration. The other type of note is the thematic concentration, which also appeared frequently. Like you see this Pershing Square in Los Angeles is a strong example, being perhaps the sharpest point of the city image, characterized by a high typical space, planting and activity. Pershing Square was the most sharply described element with its immaculate central lawn. As you see in this image, the central lawn fringed by first banana trees, then by a ring of old people sitting in solid ranks of the stone walls, then by busy streets, and finally by the close files of downtown buildings. So you see there is a different layers which is making some kind of importance of this particular square. It is used as an outdoor political forum, camp, meeting, and old people's rest. Across the Hollywood freeway is one of the strongest elements of all the nodal center of the Plaza Olivera Street. So this image is of the plaza and entrance to the Olivera Street. This was very sharply described. Its shape, trees, benches, people, and the tiles, the cobbled, actually brick paved streets. The tight space, the goods for sale, unfailing, the smells of candles and candy. Thus, the tiny Plaza Olvera Street node or even the decayed hotels of Bunker Hill claim the attention of many users. This is an image of Louisburg Square, which is another example of thematic construction, a well-known quiet residential open space redolent of the upper-class themes of the hill with a highly recognizable fenced park. So its importance as a node was out of all proportion to its function. It is a purer example of a concentration since it is no transfer point at all and was only remembered as being somewhere inside Beacon Hill. Nodes are also strong junctions. The Scollay Square, the Charles Street Rotary, and the South Stations are examples of strong junction nodes in Boston. This is an image of the Scollay Square in Boston. The Charles Street Rotary and the Scollay Square are both important junction nodes since both are the switch points at which one flanks the obstacle of Beacon Hill. Now, this is the image of the Charles Street Rotary. The Rotary itself is not a handsome place, but it clearly expresses the transfer between the River Bridge, the Sodder Drive, the Charles Streets, and the Cambridge Street. Moreover, the open river space, the elevated station, the trains popping in and out of the hillside, the heavy traffic which you see, all can be clearly visualized. So, this Charles Rotary becomes a very strong junction point and acts as a node. Even the railroad stations becomes a nodes. Major railroad stations are almost always important city nodes, although their importance may be declining. Every city has a station, and that station is happens to be the most important node of the city. This is an image of the Boston South Station, which acts as a node. And it was one of the strongest in the city since it is functionally vital for commuter, subway rider, and intercity traveler, and is usually impressive for its bulk fronting and an open space of the Dewey Square. So this open space, this forms becomes an important node for the people of the Boston city. Their use involves the singling out of one element from a host of possibilities. Some landmarks are distant ones, typically seen from many angles and distances over the tops of small elements and used as radial references. They may be within the city or at such a distance that for all the practical purposes they symbolize the constant direction. Landmark as a figure ground contrast. Landmarks become more easily identifiable, more likely to be chosen as significant if they have a clear form, if they contrast with the background, and if there is some prominence of spatial location. Figure ground contrast seem to be the principal factor. The background against which an element stand out need to be limited to the immediate surroundings. The grasshopper, weather vane of Faneuil, or the peak of the Los Angeles are the landmarks that acts the unique against the background of the entire city. This is an image of the City Medical Center in Jersey, which has a very contrast or a very strong background, and it is visually unmistakable, rising tall and wide from the edge of the cliff, a haphazardly located giant. People might single out landmarks for their cleanliness in a dirty city, the Christian Science building in Boston, or for the newness in an old city, the chapel on Arch Street. The Jersey City Medical Center was well known for its little lawn and the flowers in its great size. So you see the contrast between the built and the lawn, which makes it a landmark building. Landmarks are also the spatial prominence. Spatial prominence can establish elements as landmarks in either of two ways by making the elements visible or many locations, like the John Hancock Building in Boston, the Richfield Oil Building in Los Angeles, or by setting up a local contrast with the nearby elements, that is, a variation in the setback and height. In Los Angeles, on the 7th Street, at the corner of Flower Street, is an old two-story grey wooden building. If you can see, this is the particular building which I am talking of, which you can see in this image. So this is a building, an old building, set back some 10 feet from the building line. This is the building line, and this building is 10 feet back from the building line, containing a few minor shops. So the spatial setback and the intimate scale is very noticeable and delightful event in contrast to the great masses that occupy the rest of the frontage. This took the attention and fancy of a surprising number of people. One even anthropomorphized it as the Little Grey Lady. So it is named as the Little Grey Lady on the 7th Street. This is the image of Duomo of Florence. It is a prime example of distant landmark, visible from near and far by day or night, unmistakably dominant by size and contour. Closely related to the city's traditions, coincide with the religious and transit center, paired with its campanile in such a way that the direction of the view can be gauged from a distance. It is difficult to conceive of the city without having this great edifice come to mind. So these are the few elements or the five elements which has been part of forming the city image. These elements are simply the raw material of the environmental image of the city scale. They may be patterned together to provide a satisfying form. None of the lenses elements exist in isolation. Districts are structured with nodes, defined by edges, penetrated by paths, and sprinkled with landmarks. Thus, all the elements combine to provide an overall image of the city. The image of a given physical reality may occasionally shift its type with different circumstances of viewing. Thus, an expressway may be a path for the driver and an edge for the pedestrians. Or a central district may be a district when a city is organized on a small scale, and a node when the entire metropolitan is considered. But the categories seem to have for a given observer when he is operating at a level. None of the elements types can be isolated and above in isolation in the real case. In discussing designable element types, there is a tendency to skim over the interrelation of the parts into a whole. In such a whole, parts would expose and prepare for the districts and link together the various nodes. The nodes would join and mark off the paths, while the edges would bound off the districts and the landmarks would indicate their course. So it is the total orchestration of these units which would knit together a dense and vivid image and sustain it over areas of urban scale. So if this analysis begins with the differentiation of the data into categories, then they end with their integration into the whole image of the city. The urban design describes the physical features that define the character or image of the street, neighborhood, community, or the city as a whole. Thus, urban design is a visual and sensory relationship between the people and the built and natural environment. I hope you have enjoyed this lecture on urban design, which has emphasized on the five elements of Kevin Lynch. These are few references